Welcome to the next edition of Learning Curve Live webinar. We welcome all of you. And today we have two guests who probably need no introduction to anybody, but it's my pleasure to be able to say a few words about each of them. Vimala Ramachandran was formerly National Fellow and Professor of Teacher Management, National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, also known as NEPA, New Delhi. She was also formerly the director of ERU Consultants Private Limited. The person she will talk to, who will be in conversation with her, needs no introduction to anybody in APU or APF. We all know Hridaykant Dewan as Hardy, and he's currently with the translations initiatives of the Azim Premji University. He has been in the field of education for over 40 years in different capacities and has been associated with efforts in educational innovations and modifications in state educational structures. Very, very happy to welcome both of you, and we look forward to this very interesting discussion based on Vimala's article in issue 11, last issue, what awaits our teachers when school reopens. So I'm sure all of you are eagerly waiting to hear them talk. So over to both of you.
Thank you, Prema. So, schools have opened and things have started happening. There are many things that people experience during this period, the teachers, the students. One of the things which is very clear is that the offline classes that have started now, they were being welcomed, were being looked forward to by everyone. The online classes clearly didn't seem to gel well. They were not very effective. But did they actually serve any purpose at all? मतलब उनसे कुछ भी फायदा नहीं हुआ क्या जो ऑनलाइन क्लासेस हुई थी? Vimla?
Actually, thank you. Thanks a lot, Hardy and Prema. It depends on whom you talk to about whether the online classes were useful or not useful. Maybe for some sections of our student population, the online classes was at least something when nothing was happening. But it also depended a lot on who you are, what economic status you belong to, whether your family has a device or does not have a device, what is the connectivity kind of issues in your area. So it's a very mixed question. But I must say that when I did have an opportunity in the last 2 and a half years, to talk to teachers whom I have been in touch with for many years during many of my research projects, as probably you're aware that I've worked a lot with teachers. In fact, on the teachers, it's had a very positive impact in the sense that many teachers who never were a little wary of technology, were very wary of doing anything online, actually became more confident as they went on. And they said, we have also now started accessing information and accessing material that we need. So maybe on teachers, it may have had a positive impact, but it also had a draining impact on teachers because the kind of pedagogic tools that you need to engage a group of children in a class on an online platform is very different from the pedagogic tools that you may need in a regular classroom. So there is no straight one answer to this, Hardy. I note that many children who are in upper middle class or middle class families, urban families, actually also became much more confident with technology. We will come to that later because this also had a negative impact on the children. But it was a mixed bag. It was better than having no school at all. Mm-hmm. But for a bulk of our very, very poor and rural and remote and inaccessible areas. I don't know what impact it had. Yeah, Hardy, would you like to take this
Yeah.
discussion forward? Would you like? I think Hardy's having some problems with his connection, but let me go
I
on to the. Yes, Hardy.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I was saying that
Uh,
yes, I have a little bit of connection, so you may have to drop. So what I was saying was that shucks, yeah. I will be back shortly, I think.
okay.
I'm
See, what are
sorry.
the.
This is a bit of a problem. So I was saying that
Okay.
there were some teachers I met, children I spoke to. What they felt was that at least it gave them some kind of a connection with each other. तो पढ़ाई तो ज़्यादा नहीं थी, मतलब पढ़ाना तो बहुत मुश्किल थी दोनों तरफ से, लेकिन कम से कम एक कनेक्शन दोनों का बना रहा.
Yeah, I agree
So
that the teachers were able to establish some connection with each other and maybe with their students also, but not all students. That's why I'm saying that it's a very mixed bag in terms of, like, even in middle class families, the children never met the whole class online. The class was divided into smaller groups of 10 or 15, and over the week maybe one each group had classes, say, 2 or 3 times, and also during the day they had class maybe 2 or 3 times. So in terms of connection also, they had very little connection with all the classmates, all their classmates. I don't know whether this was the case in government schools, but in many of even the poorer and not so well off private schools, and in many of the government schools, even like Kendriya Vidyalaya, they did break children down into smaller groups for teachers to deal with them. Yes, the teachers felt they had connected with the children, but children did not feel that they had connected with each other through that whole period. So there is a difference between teachers, and as we are talking about teachers, yes, it gave them some connection, something to hold on to during these most difficult and depressing phase in all our lives, actually.
There is this thing about children that you talked about, and there is people say that has been a lot of stress on children, and of course there is a spectrum of children, so the nature of stress may be different as well. What do you think about the major kinds of stresses that children may have faced during this period, and does that going to continue linger? And how do we deal with it as a society, as institutions of schools? How do they deal with it?
The stress that the children
Yeah.
felt,
Yes.
and yeah, and the teachers felt. I think that is where I personally believe not much work has been done. I'd like to give an example from a teacher from a Kendriya Vidyalaya who was telling me that after when the schools reopened and they came back, the children, more than stress, what happened was that the attention span of children actually had gone down. Earlier, they used to sit through a class of 40 minutes or 45 minutes, depending on the school that you're going to, with a little bit of ease and quite comfortably. But now they say with this own each class was for half an hour. Even within that, they were trying to deal with technology and whatever. They found that the children's attention span to actually focus on whatever is being taught actually has come down. So the teachers have had to devise a range of games or methods to actually get the children back or get their attention back when the class is going on. This also happened in one of the poorer private schools of Delhi, where I had a long discussion with teachers as to what kind of stress they faced after the schools reopened. In fact, the first thing they said was this about attention span of children. Um, for 2 years, you have had a partly offline mode. In some places, maybe even in that school, they did have some outreach program with some teachers going into the local slum colony and talking to their students, getting them to sit in one place or under a and have some and distribute notebooks like that. So everything was done in very small modules. And because things were done in such small modules, they found that it has affected the attention span of children. Now, I do not know how wide this experience is. And as you know, there has not been much research. It's just been 2 or 3 months since schools reopened. But teachers have been saying that they've had to deal with that. And uh, also teachers themselves, you see, earlier what happened was that because in each module they barely had 20 minutes to actually transact whatever they had to say, so they had broken down a lot of things into very, very small modules. And now when you go back to teaching, they're back to the textbook mode of या आज ये पूरा टॉपिक खत्म करेंगे. So I think this is a very important feedback that we've got. But maybe Asim Premji University is an excellent position because you have students from all over the country to actually take a sample of teachers, maybe working in government schools, as to what has been, how have they actually dealt with this post COVID lockdown stress of some kind. Did they prepare for it? Because from what I find, even in the Kendriya Vidyalaya, what I heard about was that nobody prepared for anything. The principal said school could, and it's only in some high-end private schools that they had a workshop for 4 or 5 days for teachers before the children actually came back. And even in those workshops, they did, because they had the COVID protocols had to still be maintained till at least a week ago. So they were mostly talked about COVID protocols and things like that, but not about the whole experience of online education and how teachers experienced that and how it changed their practice and what kind of adjustments they may have to do once the school reopens. So that is also a fairly complex kind of question, Hadi.
Yeah, and in many cases where when you meet with teachers and you meet with children, बात करते हैं तो ये भी लगता है कि उनकी जिंदगी का बहुत सारा हिस्सा इस समय बड़ी मुश्किल में गुजरा है बच्चों का, क्योंकि वो एक बंद जगह में, काफ़ी छोटी जगह में, बहुत बाहर नहीं जा सकते, दोस्तों से नहीं मिल सकते. So apart from the fact that you had no school, you had no education, you did not interact with teachers, you didn't go out, you also had this problem of worry about things. And I don't think there has been much effort to try and understand what kind of impact that has had on children.
That's a very important question, Hardy. I'm sorry, Shafali, there seems to be a problem with the connection, but I'm sitting right next to my modem, so I don't know what's wrong. Anyway, what I do feel is that it is not only in terms of not having connection with children. Many of the children have also been traumatized during this period. And even if nobody in their immediate family had died or faced the COVID, they had heard of other people who have faced it. And this was the constant conversation at home. And the fact that they couldn't go out and play, you see, they developed a lot of angularities. And again, I'm going back to this discussion that I had with these teachers in this private school, which caters to low middle class poor children. is that many people have underestimated the emotional impact on of this COVID on children, because even in that school, many parents could not pay the fees. And in many, though in this particular school that did not become a barrier to the child continuing, but in many schools they had to discontinue for some time, and then till the parents found the money. So there was also financial insecurity, there was also food insecurity. They may have heard of or experienced death in the family. And let us also not minimize the impact of this on teachers, because our discussion is also on teachers. For example, in Uttar Pradesh, I had a chance to talk to some of the teacher union leaders who are in primary education. And some of you may be aware that close to 1,700 teachers lost their lives in UP. And in many cases, it was attributed to, I don't know how true it is, but it was attributed to the fact that they were sent on panchayat election duties and the training for panchayat elections, which were held under shamiyanas and without any COVID protocol. And as a result, many teachers actually became COVID positive. And as a result, according to the teachers union, we have to actually verify this. This was reported in many newspapers also. Many teachers lost their lives, like many people in society have lost their lives. Now, the other important point about teachers, the reason I'm coming back to teachers is that at least in Uttar Pradesh, in Rajasthan, in Delhi, of course, I've spoken to a lot of teachers on this. They were actually put on COVID duties. Like when the isolation camps were created just outside the villages, so that people who came in as migrants would stay in that isolation camp for a week or 10 days and then move into the village. So teachers were expected to run these camps. Teachers were expected to do a lot of COVID-related duties, which meant even going house to house and finding out and things like that. And in Delhi, government teachers were put on a lot of COVID duties, a lot of your camps, a lot of your even the medical isolation centers. All these things were managed by teachers. So teachers being the seen first as government employees and only secondly as teachers, they were given duties which are far away from their teaching load. And when they were put on these duties, they were not expected to take any online classes. Even in Delhi, for instance, the Delhi, for a long time, one of the main arguments which were being reopen the schools was that the government doesn't want to pull these people out of the COVID duties. They had vaccination duties, they had social distancing duties, they had all kinds of duties. And and of course these camps, various camps that were held in order to provide social distancing to people from in areas which are very, very crowded. I don't know if Mumbai teachers were involved in creating those or managing those spaces, but in Delhi the teachers were directly involved in that. I know in Uttar Pradesh and in Rajasthan the teachers were directly involved in that. Now, and as a result, many of these teachers said, "जब duty लग जाता था, हम लोग online class कैसे ले सकते हैं?" Because their duties had no time; they had to be there 24 hours. So I think they should also not minimize or ignore the kind of challenges that our teachers faced during this entire lockdown. Because as being part of the government and because schools were closed, many governments have used the teachers for a range of COVID related functions. And so now the teachers come back after those COVID related duties and then they may have started taking some online classes. Many teachers in UP told me हमने तो लिया ही नहीं क्योंकि हर समय हमारी ड्यूटी लग जाती थी. So now, how do you actually understand the impact of this on teachers and what did it do to their self-esteem, the professional identity as a teacher? I think those things also need to be flagged. I'm not saying teachers should not have been involved. Yes, as volunteers, they could have been involved. But compulsory duty, like a lot of pregnant women and women teachers in UP had to go on panchayat election duties, even though the COVID was raging. That was the peak of the second wave. So I don't know whether we have as a community of educators really try to understand the trauma and the challenges that teachers face.
Yeah, so I mean, मतलब बच्चों के लिए भी और teachers के लिए भी it has been a difficult task time, and but as always happens that after something is over, uh, the entire responsibility of educating, learning is left to the teachers and the children, and it is felt कि उनकी जिम्मेदारी है कि बच्चे सीखें और टीचर्स की जिम्मेदारी है कि बच्चे सीख पाएं इसको छोड़ना.
Yeah, Hardy, I think आपने एक बहुत अहम सवाल उठाया है. Hardy, you're getting cut, so I'll answer the question. I've got the gist of it. नहीं, आपने बहुत एक अहम सवाल उठाया है. You see, the teachers, when the children come back, I'm quite sure many of the teachers would have realized that the children are at different levels. Some children who may have had greater access to online or may have had older siblings or educated parents to have helped them through the workbooks and textbooks and get them to learn a little bit. Some children who went to neighborhood tuitions, this also was pretty common, neighborhood tuitions. They may have been be at a different level. While, for example, I'll give you one example which one of the teachers from that school was telling me. There were children who had just been promoted into class 1 when the COVID lockdown started. Around April is when in Delhi they get. Now, when they come back to school, they're in class 3. But many of them don't even know the basic alphabets or the numbers or what we call the foundational learning that happens in class 1 and 2. Many of them have just missed that. While some may have had some kind of education during that period through family, through tuitions, through online. Even online was very difficult. I have myself seen in the case of my grandson, who was just in class 1 when it started. Now, how does a small child of 6 learn to read online? It is just because he has educated parents and an educated grandmother that sat down and taught him basic things of alphabets and in Hindi, in English, numbers, go through the textbook, sit with them. But how many parents or grandparents do that? And to expect a child of 5 or 6 to be able to learn from the online forum is not very easy. And therefore the teachers must have faced a huge challenge when the schools reopened. That they probably had several percentage of the children not knowing anything at all. Now, did the governments actually plan for this? In my article, I talk about one point where saying that the governments should have actually invited teachers in at least 2 weeks before the schools reopened and get them to plan for how they're going to do the testing of children in small groups and then divide children into groups according to their levels in each different subject and then work with these children in these small groups for at least 6 months instead of directly into into the curriculum. So that is also a huge issue. And I think these are the kind of points which many state governments haven't really taken cognizance of.
Okay, so my question, which I was also, which is linked to what you have said before. I mean, this is something which is very important. What do you think are the major lessons for education system as a whole from the COVID experience? We have tried online education, we have tried use of technology, we have tried mohalla classes, we have seen the kind of effect absence of school has on children. What do you think are, what is the, because there was a talk of new norm after the COVID, and people were talking about the fact that technology can be a big kind of a step forward in helping students who are in difficult areas learn. So what is it? What do you think about Vimla?
I
Is my
think
question?
there is the biggest lesson is India is a very diverse country. The biggest lesson is within each state there is so much diversity. There may be excellent connectivity in some parts of Delhi, but if you go into some of the other parts of Delhi, even the mobile towers are sparsely located. And forget about forget about urban areas. Look at the tribal areas. So connectivity is a big issue. So I think we in India have not yet reached a point where we can expect some online support for our children in remote areas. There is no substitute for a teacher student interaction. And the children need that human touch to learn. They need to have one-to-one interaction. They need to have interaction with their peers, because children learn from teachers, they learn from each other, they help each other. And schooling is a lot about socialization. I think sometimes this online thing makes you far more individualistic. And in a society where we are anyway becoming more and more individualistic and so much more disconnected with each other, like many of the teenager children in school face a lot of emotional problem by this disconnects, because you're connecting only through phone, you're connecting only through Facebook, but one-to-one interaction. So having said that, I'll say I think there are a couple of lessons for the education system. First is, don't dismiss technology completely, but don't rely only on technology. Use technology where you can use it effectively, and please don't rely on technology where technology cannot be reached, either in terms of connectivity. The second very important lesson is, we can do a lot of teacher study, teacher preparation, teacher support through technology. And because teachers have now become more comfortable with technology. Yes, there are still teachers who live in remote areas, but if you can expect them to come to the cluster resource center where these things exist, I don't know whether they do, or block resource centers where they exist, to have good connectivity there, to have high-speed internet connection there, so that a lot of the ongoing teacher on-demand learning about subjects, about pedagogy, about whatever, can be done by a mix of technology and teacher educators. So there is a lot that teacher education can take away from this experience. The third very important lesson for me is that, you see, we have been very reliant only on textbooks. And one thing this pandemic has shown, that textbooks with a combination of worksheets is a very good combination. People, NGOs I know in Orissa and in Jharkhand, who were helping support mohalla classes or under the tree classes or reaching material, they relied a lot on these worksheets. And they used to give these worksheets out to the children. The children used to work on them. They used to collect the worksheets. They used to correct the worksheets, give the feedback to the children. You see, textbook is not the only vehicle for school education in school. So actually, the whole concept of workbooks could be quite could be used, should be leveraged a lot more. And the fourth very important lesson for me, so this is the children who read are the children who learn also well. So I think every school needs to have, or every village, every mohalla needs to have their ability to understand what is being said, their ability to comprehend what they are reading would actually go up. And I think the time is now to really look back on a far more vibrant library movement all over the country. I think every mohalla in urban areas, big, small town, needs to have children's libraries. And they need to have libraries with reference material, because now children have learned गूगल से हम इंफॉर्मेशन निकाल सकते हैं, बट गूगल सबके पास नहीं है ना. So, इसीलिए we also need to have this. So I think these are some lessons, and much more close personal supervision and support is required at the school level.
So I think one of the things that
So you add to that list, because you are such an experienced educator.
no, I'm not going to the list. I'm going to just saying. No, see, the point is that there was always this feeling then that people in the rural areas, गांव में रहने वाले लोग बच्चों की शिक्षा के बारे में चिंतित नहीं है. ये टीचर्स और सारे ऑफिसर्स का बहुत समय से ये कहना था. But I think one of the biggest takeaways from this has been the way the mohalla classes have been supported by parents. जिस तरह से उन्होंने उसको organize करने में मदद की. Many parents actually became the teachers where teachers were not reaching. How they help children learn, use the materials whichever could reach. It shows that there is a possibility of leveraging on the parent interest in their education of their children. And it is also, I think, one of the first time where the school community interaction happened outside the space of the school. So the teachers and the community met in spaces where the parents felt comfortable. So, and I think that also has a big kind of a possibility that we must think about, that how do we leverage this the interest of the parents and their capability in moving forward what is to do with classrooms. Yeah, I will take some questions which have come up. So, Prema, can you read one of them? I can't see them very well. Yeah.
Anwar Jamada is asking, it's a very challenging
year for us.
It's a very
education.
challenging, yes, for coming year for us educationally next year. Children in classes 3 to 5 are facing early language and maths problems. Teachers need more energy for this. Any suggestions for this? How to energize, how to motivate children is, I think, what he's asking about. Teachers is what he's asking about.
You know, Anwar, the important part is that actually a good teacher would be quite motivated to deal with the challenges that is in front of them. Somehow we always assume that teachers don't have the energy, teachers don't have the motivation. I think the more autonomy, the more space, and as Hardy also said, if you have very close, continuous close linkages with the family and the community, then it is possible for teachers to draw upon support. You see, the teachers will get energy when they know that people around them are actually going to support them. For example, when you're going back to class 4 children, you are in a teacher of class 4, you as a teacher, there's one teacher cannot deal with so much diversity. So you need 2 or 3 volunteers to work with you, to work with small children, because some children may be lagging behind terribly in language. Some children may have been done okay in language but had no support at all in mathematics. Some children may be completely good in something else but not good in maths, in science at all. So the teacher needs more hands inside the classroom. That is where I think if the government officially allows teachers to leverage the linkages they have with the community, to invite in parents or invite in uh, uh, young boys and girls who can actually support in the 6 months at least till all the children reach some kind of similar level, not the same level, similar level. That will infuse a lot of energy in the teachers. It is isolation that makes you demotivate. If you break the isolation of teachers and provide them that support, it is possible to actually energize the teaching community.
There are two more questions, Hadi and Vimla. One is from Sashikant Shankar, who says, what are your recommendations to tackle this challenge to handle a classroom full of students with different standards from their learning outcomes? And there's yet another question which I will read out as soon as what are
I
your
think
recommendations?
It's the same.
I think I've already answered this question. You need to
Yes,
work with
yes.
children in small groups. That is the only, that's a very important lesson that we need to take. That if in a class there are children are at different levels, the teacher needs to test all the children and make them into homogeneous small groups and work with each group. And this is where the teacher needs support. And the teacher needs support from other people in the community, because one individual, she will not be able to manage this, because the technique of managing a multi-level classroom also requires more than one hand. As you know, in many of the good private schools or in many of all over the world, look at Finland, look at all the European countries, grade 1, 2 and 3 always has one main teacher and one assistant teacher. There are two teachers who work with a group of 25 children, because they expect that all children are not going to be at the same level. You have to work with them in smaller groups.
So actually, the point is, going back to what Vimla said earlier. See, there is too much pressure on the teacher, and I think there is this. This is something which we need to kind of understand. We need to kind of make it possible for the teacher to have the autonomy and the freedom to think. If we kind of say that, well, in this period, this is the expectation that the students would have learned so much by then. If we say that this is the material that you have to follow and this is the way in which you have to go, and we want to try and simplify the way that she has to move by actually directing the way she must move, then it doesn't work. What you have to do is to empower her to use her own wisdom, her own autonomy. Provide her with the materials. You need a library, you need materials like worksheets, you need materials for children to work on, and you need hands who can actually spend time with the children, and you need a goodwill of the parents. So I think, therefore you need to understand that in order to make this work, you have to, as the NEP 2020 has said, teachers have to be at the center of reform, but teachers have to be a center of the entire system. And that is the basic problem, that we have never thought of children and teachers at the center. In spite of being saying that in all the rhetoric, the center always has been material development and the material being pushed through to the schools for them to follow. I think that's something which we need to kind of think about, as to what is it that, how can we make the teacher actually empowered and energized to do that.
And when the teacher is empowered, the teacher gets automatically energized.
That's
And
right.
I am not one of those who believes that all teachers are shirking work or any of that kind. You really provide them the support and make the education more centric towards the requirement of the teachers and the children and the interaction between the two. That will automatically infuse a lot of energy in the teachers. Even small fleeting projects which lasted for say maybe 5 years, 4 years, like Shiksha Karmi, or even like the Janshala, like many of the other projects we've known in the 1990s, they released a tremendous amount of energy only because they were so centered on the teacher and the children and not about just TLM and producing, telling every teacher ki pehla mahina diye 3 chapter khatam karo. I think we need to move away from that and empower and give the teacher the autonomy to decide what pace she wants to move, how much support she needs both inside the classroom and once she leaves the classroom. Somehow teacher-centric reform is what we need.
There's another question from Surya Pratap Deka, who says, what do you think the pandemic has taught us about parental engagement? Both possibilities as well as challenges in children's education. Shall I
I
read that
think
out again? Huh.
I think Hardy had addressed this very well. During the pandemic, at least I know in some of the, because I've been closely involved with some NGOs who ran these mohalla classes, or who the parents have actually taken a interest in the education of the children. Parents have been the most worried that the schools are shut. They have been the people who have been extremely concerned. And whether it's a literate parent or an illiterate parent, when the NGOs went and distributed these worksheets and workbooks, or held small classes under the tree, or even went home to home talking to them, the parents showed tremendous interest. And this was the point Hardy was making, that one of the very important lessons of this pandemic has been is that parents of children do really care about the education of children. And to think that parents are not bothered is absolutely gone. It's passé. In fact, the people who are most concerned, and look at even the survey results, some of these surveys done by Asim Premji University. There was another survey that was done by Asar. What does it show us? That parents said, please open the schools. The schools are very important, not only for education, but also for the emotional and physical well-being of the child. And I think this, and it has brought the teachers much closer to the parents and the parents much closer to the teachers. And I think we should not go back to business as usual and separate and say, parents, now you get out of this whole education process.
We need to actually build on that possibility that we have seen, that glimmering of the possibilities that we have seen. उस पे काम करने की जरूरत है, उसको बढ़ाने की जरूरत है. हाँ, चुनौतियां तो हैं, because parents are of diverse category. When you get them all together, this was a occasion where some of the parents were more directly involved. If you want to kind of systematize it and say that more parents should be involved, then there would be some challenges which may come up. But I think the point that is important is that unless the teachers and parents collectively look at the education of the child as a joint enterprise, I don't think we are going to be able to fulfill whatever we think is needed for a child to become a member of the society. Yeah.
Prema, there's one gentleman who wants us to repeat some of it in Hindi. Hardy, will you do that about this whole parent-child interaction? आप हिंदी में वो एक हाँ कुछ लोग हैं जो लिख रहे हैं कि कृपया हिंदी में समझा दीजिए.
हाँ, मैं 2-4 चीजें हिंदी में बता देता हूँ. एक तो ये बात पहले हमने कही थी कि टीचर्स का जो पूरा मोटिवेशन है वो इस बात पे निर्भर करता है कि उनको कितनी एजेंसी है, कितनी स्वायत्तता है और कितना उनको तय करने का अधिकार है कि कक्षा में वो क्या करेंगे। और ये समझना कि उसको टीएलएम देने से, उसको बता देने से उसको हर पल क्या करना है उसका फायदा होता है, ये समझना गलत है। उसको अपनी कक्षा में बच्चों के जो डाइवर्सिटी है, जो भी जहाँ जहाँ वो हैं, उसको समझ के उसके आधार पे तय करना है कि आगे कैसे पढ़ना है। उसके पास अगर किताबें हों, वर्कशीट्स हों, और उसके अलावा उसके पास सपोर्ट हो, मतलब वो सपोर्ट ऐसा जिसमें कि कोई व्यक्ति, चाहे वो वॉलंटियर्स हो, चाहे वो जो उसके साथ कक्षा में बच्चों के साथ काम कर सके। विनम ने कहा था कि जो भी अच्छे स्कूल हैं उसमें हर 25 बच्चों पे टीचर के साथ एक असिस्टेंट ज़रूर होता है। तो उस तरह की ज़रूरत होती है ताकि बच्चों के साथ इंडिविजुअली काम किया जा सके। तो एक बात तो ये मुझे लगता है बहुत महत्वपूर्ण कही गई थी कि ये जो पूरा शिक्षकों का को मोटिवेट करने का मसला है, शिक्षकों को तैयार करने का मसला है, उसका सबसे महत्वपूर्ण हिस्सा ये है कि उनकी स्वायत्तता को बरकरार रखना और उनको शिक्षा के काम में प्राथमिकता से लगाना, और बच्चों और शिक्षक को स्कूल के केंद्र में समझना। दूसरी बात जो मुझे लगता है बहुत ज़रूरी हुई, वो हुई पालकों के बारे में। वो ये बात हुई कि ये जो पेंडेमिक के बीच दौरान जो अनुभव हुआ, मोहल्ला क्लासेस का जो अनुभव हुआ, जिस तरह से लोगों ने काम किया, उस सब से ऐसा लगा कि जैसे कि बहुत सारी चीज़ें जो हम मानते थे कि माता पिता नहीं करना चाहते, बच्चे नहीं करना चाहते, वो शुरू हुई। और बच्चों ने, पेरेंट्स ने बहुत इंटरेस्ट दिखाया अपने बच्चों की पढ़ाई में। तो इसलिए ये बहुत ज़रूरी है समझना कि वो जो हम कह रहे हैं कि माता पिता नहीं चाहते और माता पिता इंटरेस्टेड नहीं, वो गलत है। लेकिन ये भी है कि कुछ जगहों पे ऐसा भी है कि माता पिता जब ज़्यादा इंटरेस्टेड होते हैं तो वो प्रेशर भी बन जाता है स्कूलों पे और बच्चों के सीखने पे। तो उसको भी देखने की ज़रूरत है कि बच्चों पे अतिरिक्त दबाव के आप इतनी जल्दी ये उत्पाद दिखाओ, तो वो एक तरह से माता पिता के साथ संवाद की भी ज़रूरत है कि उनको शिक्षा में शामिल करना और उनके साथ मिलकर ये तय करना कि बच्चे कितना सीखेंगे और कैसे सीखेंगे। जब तक ये दोनों चीज़ें बैलेंस नहीं होंगी कि उनका इन्वॉल्वमेंट और उस इन्वॉल्वमेंट में बच्चों के साथ एक ऐसा स्तर का निर्धारण जो वो पा सकें, तब तक थोड़ा मुश्किल है ये। आई थिंक दिस इज दी ब्रॉड समरी, यही मुझे लगता है मोटी मोटी समरी है जिस पे हम बात की हुई है।
और टीचर थोड़ी संवेदनशीलता से हमें देखनी चाहिए और समझनी चाहिए। ये जो बार बार हम लोग हर कमी को टीचर के कंधे पर डाल देते हैं, वो भी गलत है। हमें ये भी समझना है कि टीचर जो है वो कितने चुनौतियों का सामना किया है और टीचर ने इन 2-3 साल। थैंक यू प्रेमा, आई थिंक वी आर रनिंग आउट ऑफ टाइम.
No, we have a little more time.
A couple of
10 minutes
couple of
more.
questions, Vimla, I want to ask you from what your article is. तो आपने
One more
हमें
one question. Sorry, may I say that one question I want to ask is, you've said that one class should have 2 teachers in order to be able to present the lesson correctly, and I think that's a very good idea. And some of the more better private schools, this does happen. But in some states, you get allocation of teachers depending on the number of children there are in a class. So you might have 50 children.
Got the question. Yeah.
And have only
You
one
see?
teacher. How to?
Yeah, you're breaking away, Prem. I've got the gist of your question.
Yeah. Okay.
You see, under the RT Act, one teacher is supposed to be for 30 children. We are living through very unusual times. Children have come back to school after a break of 2 years. Children are at very, very different levels of learning. So I think at least in the short term, for the next 1.5 years, at least at the primary level, classes 1 to 5. You need to have one teacher and one assistant teacher in every class so that the teacher can actually work, so that the system can encourage teachers to work with children in small groups. Ideally, that should be what happens regularly, but ye to hai nahi, because you're under the RTA Act. There is a requirement of one teacher, and that is how we calculate how many teachers we need for the system. But these are unprecedented times. So during these unprecedented times, आजकल 2 साल बाद यदि स्कूल खुला है और टीचर्स इतनी चुनौतियों की सामना कर रहे हैं क्लास में, तो कम से कम हर प्राथमिक शिक्षक को एक असिस्टेंट टीचर भी देना बहुत जरूरी है, ताकि हर टीचर हर क्लास में बच्चों को छोटे छोटे समूह में पढ़ा सके, ताकि 2 बच्चे बिल्कुल अक्षर ज्ञान नहीं है और कक्षा 3 में पहुंच गए हैं, उनके साथ काम करने के लिए टाइम चाहिए, जगह चाहिए, लोग चाहिए. तो ये असाधारण वक्त है, ये साधारण वक्त नहीं है. तो इसीलिए असाधारण वक्त में, दिस वेरी वेरी अनयूजुअल टाइम्स में, the governments also need to think more creatively. And I think these assistant teachers can actually be drawn from the neighborhood and from the community to support the teacher, or from NGOs who can provide these assistant teachers. You need them in the short term, because you can't run a bridge course in every class to bring children up to a particular level. There has to be a systemic answer to this problem. Not a problem, this is a challenge. The child is not responsible. स्कूल बंद रहा, ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन का कोई सुविधा नहीं था, तो बच्चा करता क्या?
मुश्किल बात है ना प्रिय, कि आप अगर ये समझें कि हम ये कहें कि जो टीचर क्लास में 50 बच्चे हैं और एक टीचर है, तो वो तो वैसे ही बहुत मुश्किल मसला है. और अभी के समय में जहाँ बच्चे इतने समय बाद स्कूल आ रहे हैं, तो ये बहुत ही मुश्किल स्थिति है जिसके बारे में हमें सोचना चाहिए. लेकिन अक्सर ये चीज़ें हैं जिनके बारे में सोचा नहीं जाता है. सोचा भी जाता है तो कुछ करने की शायद वो नहीं होती है. तो आई डोंट नो, मुश्किल है.
एक्चुअली मुश्किल समय में हम लोगों को थोड़ा सा फ्लेक्सिबल होना, लचीलापन की बहुत जरूरत है. ये जो नॉर्म बेस्ड हम लोग सारा प्लानिंग करते हैं, उससे थोड़ा हटना भी जरूरी है. एक ट्राइबल एरिया में आप जा रहे हो और वहां बेशक आपके क्लास में सिर्फ 25 बच्चे हैं, फिर भी उन 25 बच्चे 25 डिफरेंट लेवल पर हैं, और उन बच्चों को हर बच्चे को यदि सीखना है, तो कम से कम अगले 1-2 साल के लिए तो सरकार को इसके लिए कुछ साधन उपलब्ध करना जरूरी है. और वो कम्युनिटी के थ्रू भी आप कर सकते हैं, वो पंचायत के थ्रू भी आप कर सकते हैं, वो स्थानीय एनजीओ के थ्रू भी कर सकते हैं, पर करना जरूरी है.
Vimla, what is your view on what is called in some parts of the country management teachers, who definitely get paid less than the others with the same load of work, and it doesn't work? What can we do to make sure that people are not exploited in that fashion?
I have not heard of management teachers. I'm sorry. I've heard of contract teachers.
It's the same thing. It's the same concept, which in some parts of India are called contract. For instance, in the south, they are called management teachers. In Tamil Nadu, for instance, in the schools I work with, government schools, because of this idea that a class of 50 can only have one teacher, we have to, appoint somebody else to assist her, and the school has to pay that salary. So definitely, there's a huge gap. Any ideas about what we can do about that?
I don't know, it's a very, very difficult question. An assistant teacher or a contract teacher who's assisting a regular teacher does not have the same status or the salary as a regular teacher. Uh, but it's a very complex issue because I don't know, every state is very different. In a place like Jharkhand, contract teachers are 56% of your entire teaching force. So Tamil Nadu, officially there are no contract teachers. There are these guest teachers or these management teachers, as you're calling, or whatever it is. They're brought in for some specific for a specific time and for a specific purpose, and the qualifications required for them is also very different. But in Jharkhand, all teachers have to clear the teacher eligibility test. They have the same qualifications, but 44% of teachers are getting a very high salary, and 56% of teachers are getting low salaries. So I think the situation in Tamil Nadu and Jharkhand are very different. So I don't know, because in many schools, higher secondary schools, the lab assistants, for instance, who are there in the chemistry lab, would actually assist the chemistry teacher in whatever. But but I do not know what this management teacher of Tamil Nadu is, because I have personally not come across, so I won't be able to answer that question.
पर ये तो बात चिंता की है ही ना कि इतने एक ही काम के लिए अलग अलग तरह के डेजिग्नेशन, अलग अलग तरह की सैलरी, और फिर जो सिक्योरिटी है काम की, और जिस तरह से जो ट्रीटमेंट है वो भी इतना फ़र्क है कि टीचर की कुछ एक तरह से अपने काम के प्रति कुछ जवाबदेही तो मांगी जाती है, लेकिन उसमें कुछ इज्जत नहीं बचती है. आई थिंक दैट्स अ वेरी बिग कंसर्न दैट वी हैव. And as a system, we need to think about that as to how do we, I mean, NEP has talked about this again, teacher being, so उस पर सोचना तो पड़ेगा कि उसको कैसे, क्योंकि across states बहुत फ़र्क है और इसको लेके हमेशा रेजिस्टेंस होता है कि इस पर नहीं कर सकते. But Vimala, I have one last question for you before we close. ये जो अभी इतना साल 2 साल का गैप हुआ है, तो असेसमेंट में हमें क्या, आपको क्या लगता है क्या करना चाहिए? असेसमेंट बंद कर देना चाहिए, नहीं करना चाहिए? बिकॉज बहुत उसके ऊपर भी बहुत बातचीत होती है कि असेसमेंट, बच्चे मॉनिटरिंग करना, बच्चे सीख रहे हैं, कितना सीख रहे हैं. सो व्हाट इज योर टेक ऑन दैट?
My take on that is very simple. The teacher assessment is required and necessary, but वो हर टीचर को स्वतंत्रता होनी चाहिए कि वो अपने बच्चों को समय समय पर असेस करें और उस असेसमेंट के आधार पर वो बच्चों को अपना इनपुट दे. In English, that every teacher should have the freedom to do periodic assessment of her children, her students, and based on her assessment of how the children have performed, she can regroup the children, she can teach another topic, she can actually do something. So assessment should be built into the process, which gives the feedback to the teacher. I am very wary of these large scale assessments, which is only the results are collated and given to somebody in the state headquarters, and the teachers have no value. I think assessments need to be teacher led, teacher done, and it needs to feed into the teaching learning practices of the teacher. Now, this is what happens in most private schools. There are regular assessments which are done. Some schools have weekly tests, surprise tests as they call it. Some schools have monthly. Some schools have different, every teacher, but teacher needs the feedback. The biggest problem of RTE was that when we talked about no detention, everybody interpreted it as no assessment. Assessment टीचर का बिल्कुल टीचिंग लर्निंग प्रोसेस का एक बहुत अहम भाग है. Teaching assessment is very much the heart of whatever she's doing. And when she assesses her children, And then she gets a feedback on where the children are. And she suddenly realizes that, hey, 70% of my children have not understood the carry forward subtraction. Maybe I should do that again in class. That is the kind of feedback she needs. If all the children are having a problem with, in Kannada, what we call Otta Akshara, there are alphabets where you mix two, three alphabets, or even in Telugu, and in Tamil also. Now it's very difficult for a small child to understand an alphabet which has half of some other alphabet and half of this alphabet. Now she realizes that is the problem, then she can do it again. So assessment has to go hand in hand with the teacher's own teaching plan. It has to be teacher centric. I am very wary of these large scale assessments.
तो दो
I
बात
just
इसमें
with one statement. When I was doing this very detailed research in one North Indian state, I'm not mentioning it because I don't want to accuse somebody. That secretary, she told me when I was interviewing her, that madam, we have made sure that all the schools do very well in NAS. But I said, you have 78% vacancy in secondary schools. How are you going to do it? नहीं हम सारे बच्चों को तैयार कर देंगे. And then when I went to the district and I went to the block, what was the tayari? The answers of the NAS questions were actually written on the board. And only the children who could not copy the answers did badly in that exam. And when the NAS results came, that state was much ahead of Tamil Nadu, much ahead of Gujarat, much ahead of most other states. So I think there is a problem with these mass assessments. The system may need it for its own purpose, but it serves very little purpose to the teacher who's actually working on a day-to-day basis with children.
एक्चुअली सेंट्रल बात तो बच्चे की है ना, और अभी गैप के पीरियड में तो बहुत ज़रूरी है ये समझना कि बच्चा जो 2 साल बाद आया है स्कूल में, जब तक कि उसको ये विश्वास नहीं होगा कि जहाँ से वहाँ है, वहाँ से ही उसका आकलन किया जाएगा, ही विल बी असेस्ड फ्रॉम वेयर शी इज़. It is very difficult for her to keep herself motivated. I mean, if the expectation is that you should be on top of floor 1, 2, and you are not even ready to start moving to floor 1, it is very difficult for the child to actually feel motivated. तो मतलब जो assessment का मकसद है वो है बच्चे के और टीचर के बीच ये तय करना कि उसको क्या पढ़ाना है. अब डाइवर्स क्लासरूम है, ग्रुप्स में काम कर रहे हैं आप, तो अलग अलग ग्रुप को अलग अलग असेसमेंट भी कर सकते हैं आप. तो ये कुल मिला के जो हम राष्ट्रीय स्तर पे, राज्य स्तर पे असेसमेंट करवाते हैं, इसका क्या मकसद है ये मुझे आज तक स्पष्ट नहीं हुआ है. आई एम जस्ट echoing what you have said, Vimla, that why do we do this actually? This is a total waste of time and effort for so many people, and is so frustrating for the children and the teachers. I think I'll stop here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hardy. I think your questions were very good and leading.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Vimla.
Thank you all of you for joining this. And I don't know, I think Rema seems to have gone offline. And we'll wait for her before we conclude. I hope all of you enjoyed it very much.
Prema is back online. Yeah.
Prema's
off. Yes, I just went off. Thank you both very, very much for sparing your time, and to the audience also for attending this. It was most interesting. And Vimala, for your information, the next issue of the Learning Curve is called Working with Worksheets. So we were very happy when you mentioned that worksheets, were so important during the pandemic period. Thank you so much.
Thank
Please
you,
meet us
everyone.
on May 4th at the same time for the next installment of LC Live. Thank you.